Hello and welcome to the second in our 5-part series, Living Our Principles. This week's study is on the nurturing community. The social principles of the United Methodist Church are part of the long-standing tradition of our denomination. The social principles speak to human issues in the contemporary world. In other words, how do we, as the people called Methodists, utilize the teachings of our faith to engage with the world around us? The social principles cover a broad range of contemporary social topics. Some of them, quite honestly, can be quite controversial in the politically charged and polarized society in which we live. It is not our intent to politicize any of these topics, but rather to look at them with a strong biblical and theological foundation. The social principles of the United Methodist Church are a call to all members of the United Methodist Church to a prayerful, studied dialogue of faith and practice. We hope you enjoy this examination of the nurturing community.
Throughout the world, people of faith are the first responders to the suffering of their neighbors, faithfully advocating alongside people who bear the ills of our times. It begins at the grassroots level, in the village, city, or the small town. A community rises to unite faith with deed, and the world changes, and we bear witness to a force of light that renews our hope. Whether a person is rich or poor, young or old, male or female, people of faith honor the sacred worth of all persons. All persons are important because they are human beings created by God, and not because they have merited significance. Communities have the opportunity, perhaps the responsibility, to cultivate and nurture individuals into the fullness of their humanity. In some cases, the odds seem insurmountable, though, as the communities themselves are devastated. From unemployment and poverty to famine, disease, and war, cities, towns, and villages throughout the world are challenged to rebuild, renew, and respond to the needs of its most vulnerable members. It is in the face of some of the most horrendous assaults hurled at communities that spiritual leaders have emerged. They are people of faith. They are survivors. They refuse to be silenced. They are standing tall to nurture and restore their communities. When communities throughout the world take a hit with poverty, war, disease, drug abuse, crime, and corruption, it is the children who so often are forgotten. But few societies have experienced this crisis like the children of Liberia. Liberia, situated on the west coast of Africa, is bordered by Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Côte d'Ivoire. Slightly larger than the state of Tennessee, Liberia is one of the poorest countries in the world. 2 civil wars have destroyed Liberia's economy and displaced hundreds of thousands of the nation's citizens. Lost in the masses are the children, the abandoned, and the orphaned. At last count, 340,000. Some of the most devastating stories are those told by boys and girls, former child soldiers, who were kidnapped and coerced into combat. According to one study, 87% had seen a family member killed, 60% had witnessed other children beaten to death, and 84% reported that they experienced being surrounded by, lying underneath, or stepping on dead bodies. Amongst the turmoil, though, is a man dedicated to empowering girls and teaching them an alternative way of life.
Up to now, I've been working with the ex-combatant children and youth, the girls who were victims of rape and those who were fighting and not fighting, and some they have been like sexual slaves to the combatant. So they feel that Kakata is a city of exposure. I mean, what to do? So they feel that the means of survival should be sex.
Frito Kikolinga, a university professor, first began working with a group of 13 girls in 2006. Today, he works with about 129 of them.
and all of them, they are working fine. On the other program, we do sex education, we do HIV/AIDS, do counseling, sometimes for prayer. We teach them in the way they can understand that they can survive not through sex giving, but they can work with their hands and try to generate money that can help them. So we do cosmetology to train them as a hairdresser. We do typing, we do sewing and crocheting, we do pastry baking, soap making, tie and dye.
Recently, Frito brought in 6 old computers and initiated computer training classes.
And what we do is when we train them like that, after the 9 months, we graduate a group. In that group, we select those with high performance and try to give them a small loan that, no, okay, start the business, but you will have to pay back to the program.
Frito's next goal is to lease a site in the city of Buchanan, where the businesses can support one another.
We have our beauty salon. We have a place for pastry selling where they can sell different things. It's like everybody, we advertise about that. Everybody, we know that, no, this is a place where you can go and pay little money, receive some services.
In terms of mental and spiritual recovery, Frito chooses to be hopeful.
So probably people that we say, no, we will not talk in terms of ex-combatants, but we will always talk in terms of ex-combatants because they participated in something, they are no longer into it. Probably we have to disarm them in their mind now. So if we disarm their minds, and then they can move in the right direction for recovery.
The sections of the social principles addressing the nurturing community cover 18 different statements on issues surrounding human interactions with each other. At the heart of the nurturing community is the idea that all people are of sacred worth and that we are called to love one another as God has loved us. While this section covers a broad range of topics, chances are that someone or many people in your congregations have faced or are facing these issues. They may not always be publicly known, but someone you know and love is dealing with one or more of these issues. How we respond to those amongst us and how others respond to us when we are facing these situations speaks volumes about the type of faith we live. The opening section of the social principles on the nurturing community reads, "The community provides the potential for nurturing human beings into the fullness of their humanity. We believe we have a responsibility to innovate, sponsor, and evaluate new forms of community that will encourage development of the fullest potential in individuals. Primary for us is the gospel understanding that all persons are important because they are human beings created by God and loved through and by Jesus Christ, and not because they have merited significance. We therefore support social climates in which human communities are maintained and strengthened for the sake of all persons and their growth. We also encourage all individuals to be sensitive to others by using appropriate language when referring to all persons. Language of derogatory nature with regard to race, nationality, ethnic background, gender, sexuality, and physical differences does not reflect value for one another and contradicts the gospel of Jesus Christ. This section of the social principles covers 18 distinct areas: culture and identity, the family, marriage, divorce, single persons, women and men, human sexuality, family violence and abuse, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, abortion, ministry with those who have experienced an abortion, adoption, faithful care for dying persons, suicide, sexual assault, pornography, and bullying. You no doubt heard and saw in that list some topics which have been very divisive over the course of our denomination's history. We encourage you to explore these sections in depth and to seek a deep understanding of the biblical and theological stances of our denomination on these topics. We encourage you to read the entire section, but in an effort to keep these video discussions easily accessible to all, we will summarize just a few of the overall points. One key area of consideration in examining the nurturing community overall is human trafficking. This issue is of major importance for the Texas Annual Conference, as many areas within our boundaries are identified as major human trafficking hotspots and transportation arteries. Chances are there is some form of human trafficking and modern-day slavery occurring in every community in our conference. The book of Hebrews addresses slavery, both spiritual and physical. Since, therefore, the children share flesh and blood, God likewise shared the same things, so that through death God might destroy the one who has power over death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. For it is clear that God did not come to help the angels, but the descendants of Abraham. The book of Proverbs offers insight on the treatment of those who cannot speak for themselves. Certainly, victims of human trafficking fall into this category. Speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of all the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Although terms like human trafficking are not found in the Bible, the biblical narrative makes clear how people of faith are to treat those in bondage and those whose voice is not heard in their quest for freedom and justice. We are to speak out for those without a voice and to use our positions of privilege to amplify the voices of those crying out. Our United Methodist tradition affirms that the community is the vehicle in which we ensure that all people are brought into the fullness of their humanity. It is through communal effort that we bring light to the dark places and nurture those amongst us who are suffering into their full potential as children of God. The social principles are specifically described as speaking to human issues in our contemporary world. We live in a contemporary world where issues surrounding the care for one another are of vital importance. It is our duty as the people called Methodists to utilize scripture, tradition, reason, and experience to engage in a prayerful, studied dialogue of faith and practice. To that end, paragraph 161I speaks to human trafficking and its discussion of sexual abuse. We deplore all forms of commercialization and exploitation of sex, with their consequent cheapening and degradation of human personality. To lose freedom and be sold by someone else for sexual purposes is a form of slavery, and we denounce such business and support the abused and their right to freedom. The Book of Resolutions also addresses this issue. United Methodists have worked to eradicate the many forms of violence that destroy the integrity of individuals, families, communities, and nations. People of faith must work to change attitudes, beliefs, policies, and practices at all levels of society that dehumanize and promote exploitation and abuse. These are reminders that forced labor and the sexual exploitation of humans is nothing less than modern-day slavery. The Bible also informs our understanding of domestic violence. In Ezekiel, we read, "Thus says the Lord God, enough, O princes of Israel, put away violence and oppression, and do what is just and right." Likewise, the Gospel of John states, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another." This seems like such a simple concept, and yet it is so often overlooked in our daily lives. Christ says that the single key to fulfilling all of God's law is love. Love each other just as God has loved us. That is the instruction for how we should interact with each other. Love one another. You know, the statistics on domestic violence are absolutely scary. 1 in 3 women report having been a victim of intimate partner violence at some point in their lives. 1 in 3 women sitting in the pews of our churches on Sunday morning is or has been a victim of intimate partner violence. And women are not the only victims. Men report being victims of domestic abuse at alarming rates. This is one of the most pervasive and destructive forms of violence in our society, and it is almost guaranteed that someone we know is dealing with this horrific issue. For those reasons, the social principles clearly state we recognize that family violence and abuse in all its forms, verbal, psychological, physical, sexual, is detrimental to the covenant of the human community. We encourage the church to provide a safe environment, counsel, and support for the victim. While we deplore the actions of the abuser, we affirm that person to be in need of God's redeeming love. Friends, this may be one of the hardest actions for us to take. It is easy for us to accept that the survivor needs to be nurtured in our community. We are a people of compassion and justice, and we can easily see that those suffering this form of abuse need the love and protection of the church. What is harder to accept is that the abuser is in need of God's redeeming grace and love as well. Remember, all people are of sacred worth. These are just a few examples of the way in which United Methodists have publicly declared that they will put their faith into action. If you want more information on any of these topics involving the nurturing community, I hope you will find time to look deeper into the paragraph 161 of the Social Principles. The facts of these particular issues are sobering. Forced labor and sex trafficking generates $150 billion in profits for the traffickers. Of the items we often buy, officials have identified 136 goods from 74 countries that are produced by forced or child labor. 1 in 3 women have been the victim of intimate partner violence. Human trafficking and domestic violence cross all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic boundaries. So, what are we as the people called Methodists to do? The first thing is to be educated. The second thing is to find groups and other people in your community who are addressing these issues and get involved. If you can't find someone already working to address an issue, contact your local government officials and offer to help them address these issues. On your screen are just a few resources available to help you get started. Throughout this series, you will be reminded that John Wesley is quoted as saying, "Christianity is essentially a social religion. To turn it into a solitary religion is indeed to destroy it." In other words, we are called to live our faith in the public sphere. We are called to heed the teachings of the Bible and the tradition of our faith and to live boldly in society. We hope this short examination of the nurturing community has sparked within you a desire to engage in a prayerful, studied dialogue of faith and practice. And we hope you will use these videos with others to take a closer look at what it means to live as persons of faith in this world. Please join us next week as the Reverend Amy Walker leads us through a discussion of the social community. Thank you for joining us.